guidelines. These meetings are for sharing, for listening, and for learning. We ask that everyone is respectful of different perspectives and of each other, and that we stay on point. This meeting is specifically around land tenure as a subtopic of the Ag Land Equity Task Force scope. We'll do a little bit of public comment and Zoom overview. So we have a public comment process. We will have time at the end of this 1-hour meeting for the public to speak. They can speak on any of the agenda items or any general issue with the Ag Land Equity Task Force. You can complete the public comment form at this website, sgc.ca.gov/meetings-events, or you can also raise your hand on Zoom. Zoom tips. You can go down to the menu bar and click the raise hand feature there. Cameras are optional. And now I see that we have Emily in the room, so I'm gonna do a roll call to establish quorum. Vice Chair Emily Bergano.
Hopka, hello, here.
And member Leah Schwartzman.
Here.
Great. All right, so here is the agenda for the day. We're going to spend the next about 50 minutes. We just did the welcome. The bulk of our hour together is going to be a working session, and then we'll discuss next steps towards the end. So the plan for today is to review the section of the work plan that specifically relates to the land tenure dimension. We'll identify and consider the different topics of priorities that we've been discussing over the past few months. We will start out with a bit of a staff proposal for how to advance this work within this subcommittee. And then we'll hear from task force members and have a discussion about how you all want to advance this work and which areas you want to prioritize. And then we'll summarize the discussion and leave a little bit of time for public comment. So just making sure I didn't miss anything. Yeah, I think we can get right to it. So this will be our working session section of the meeting, and I'm going to turn it over to Camille.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Tessa, and thank you, Leah and Emily, for being here, and to members of the public. So Emily, this will look familiar to you because we're running this working session along the lines of the other newly established subcommittees that we established in that August meeting. So as you both know, this is the land tenure subcommittee that was established in August. And the goal today for this short introductory meeting is to look once again at the excerpt of the work plan that is specific to this dimension of land access, the land tenure dimension. And alongside that, to really consider and discuss some ways forward with this work. So staff have put together a proposal. It really is meant as a proposal. It's an idea. It's something for you to kind of look at and say, yes, no, change in this way. So we wanted to give that to you just as a kind of template or a pathway to move forward with your work. And so as you're doing that, if you can kind of hold in your mind, what could this subcommittee do to advance the priority topics that are related to land tenure? And then what do we need to know? What do we already know? And then what is really the timeline for how that knowledge would be either cultivated and then shared out in the advancement of the recommendations that the task force will be working on as we move forward. So we'll start with a really quick review. Tessa, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. Oh, there we go. Of the part of the work plan that was shared with you in August, it has been revised slightly to incorporate some of the feedback that we received in August on that work plan. But we wanted just to turn to you and first share how the land tenure dimension of land equity was described, and get a sense from you whether that very brief description maps onto what you imagine could be the scope of this subcommittee and the contributions it could make to the overarching work of the task force. So what we have there now, I'll read this out loud and then just open it for Leah and Emily if you have any thoughts, questions, ways to improve this. How an individual, entity, organization, or government maintains relationships with land once they have access, and what is required to do so. So that's the description that we had thus far of what we mean by land tenure. So any thoughts, any responses to that from our subcommittee members?
I think initially I'm just trying to think about ways that this subcommittee is distinguishing itself from the land acquisition subcommittee. And I think what it is it's the different nuances that may or may not to lead to acquisition, understanding that not everybody wants to or is in a position to own land. So what are the alternatives to direct land ownership? And what are potentially some of the pathways to ownership for folks who are on a trajectory but not ready to just execute on ownership? And I'm really curious to hear from Emily when she's ready about other relationships to land that the Native community has and how that relates kind of above and beyond just like a formal land acquisition project. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Leah. I think it sounds like this description works, but really what is sort of key here is that like maintenance of those relationships with land and a consideration of what those relationships could be, how they would unfold so that tenure is prioritized, right? So that stability on the land is really, and that might look like leasing, it might look like pathways to ownership, it might look like other kinds of relationships with land. And sovereignty on that land, right? Did I kind of capture what you were saying there? Okay. Emily, want to give you the chance to jump in if you feel you'd like to, but if not, we can also move to the next slide. Okay.
Yeah, I think I'll sit on this and then I'll provide some feedback.
Excellent. Thank you. That sounds great. And thank you for saying that, because this is not the only opportunity to engage with this and talk through it, work through it, and propose sort of more comprehensive or better ways of approaching this. So thank you, Emily. All right, Tessa, if you will, please move forward. This next slide, compared to this one, is going to be totally overwhelming. So apologies. But what this is a direct copy into this slide of the information that was in the work plan within the land tenure section, the sort of topics that fall under that land tenure idea, the issues that have come up in conversations thus far, and the potential solutions that have come up in conversations thus far. So this really is meant as staff's best attempt at consolidating what has already been shared by task force members, trying to find ways into that work, right? And really what we would like your help with today is identifying what is prioritized, what belongs in this land tenure subcommittee's work, right? And then how that work is going to complement some of the other things that you know are going on with the task force. So I'm going to actually give you a little time to read this again, so just we can sit quietly. But before I do that, let me clarify the red text. So Emily, you will already have known this, but the red text is meant to note other subcommittees that are working on similar issues. So for instance, the ag easements and other restrictions on land use and on sale can reduce farmers' ability to build wealth and retire. That could be something that might be considered in that land use governance and sovereignty. The like sort of sovereignty of that land and its use, right, changes with those kinds of restrictions. Reduce financial burdens for first-time landowners to acquire and maintain land, grants and resources is very much interested in that, focused on that. The technical assistance, education, and information sharing, I put that whole category as something that's being explored both by community outreach and by grants and resources. So if there are ways that this subcommittee wants to contribute to that work, what in particular is of interest to this subcommittee, and how can these things complement other work going on? And then again, that last one there, the public funds directly to land stewards, that's something that grants and resources is interested in and having conversations about. So those pieces of red text are not meant to mean that this subcommittee couldn't also take up those issues, but just to say, when considering the work you want to prioritize in this subcommittee, what aspects of this or what ways could you complement these other subcommittees in their work? So I'm going to now be quiet and give you some time. So I'll kind of take a look. Maybe let's plan 5-7 minutes. Just give yourself some time to read back through this again. You can either raise your hand when you're done or unmute. And when you're ready, we can talk through the next piece of this, which is really how do we now take these ideas and mobilize them in this subcommittee. So let's take a little time to read back through this and do a review. How are you both feeling with time? A few more minutes helpful or feeling ready to jump in?
I'm good. Here's to get going.
Okay. Leah, a few more minutes or ready to jump in? Ready to jump in? A thumbs up for that? Okay, awesome. Thank you. Thank you both. Okay, so I really just wanted to open it up here to see whether there's anything that comes to mind that you either see on this list as extremely high priority for the subcommittee, something that's not here that you want to make sure is on this list, something that maybe feels less direct. So really just responses to this. Where would you like to go in the context of what the subcommittee could do to mobilize some of these things? If it's helpful to kind of bounce to the staff proposal, we can do that. I just wanted to give you both the chance to maybe let staff know whether this is feeling like it maps onto your understanding of the land tenure issues, potential solutions, the conversations that have been had so far, and then what more information might be needed. So yeah, go ahead, Leah.
Yeah, I have a little list going in front of me. I just didn't want to hog the space in case Emily wanted to chime in first. Should I just go for it, Emily?
Yeah, please.
Okay. All right. So I see there being kind of a few different ways that we can slice this. But one thought that I have is that when we're talking about leasing over acquisition, we often are talking about like private and public landowners. And so it feels like, it may not be true, I don't have stats, but it feels like with public land opportunities, the opportunities for ownership or pathway to ownership are a bit more complex and fewer and far between. So it seems like there's an opportunity to make some suggestions for the way that public lands are leased to farmers and tribal entities. So what that access looks like, what that structure for secure tenure looks like, because oftentimes you see public entities really wanting to keep it as insecure as possible, to be frank. Like you see licenses, which is not a very secure form of tenure. You see contracts, which I'm not going to get down on contracts. Like grazing contracts are absolutely a solution to fuel load reduction. So I'm not, like that might be a seasonal thing, but longer term contracts, could be something to discuss. And then there's like more secure long-term leases. And oftentimes cities and counties have different kinds of mandates on those lands. Like it has to be like at or above market value, but determining market value takes in a whole bunch of considerations that are not always applicable to smaller scale growers. And so those prices and those mandates, I'd love to just like take a hatchet to those types of mandates. Also, what we find on public lands is that the contracts are so cumbersome. The leases are just, I'm working on one now that is 75 pages long. And that is not a structure that works for direct leasing with farmers, because they just aren't even going to, the amount of work to even understand a contract like that and feel confident in signing a contract like that is huge. So in a lot of cases, we need some kind of an intermediary organization that holds the lease with the public agency and then leases smaller parcels out to farmers. So one thing to think about is how do we support those organizations, but also how do we communicate with, public agency lawyers about like toning it down, removing this kind of frankly unnecessary barrier of legalese. It doesn't need to be in Old English to be a legal document. So I'm all about taking the power back and making the language accessible. So that's one bucket that I just wanted to comment on. And to that end, as an organization, I run an agreement building services program. And our goal is to educate and empower land seekers and to educate landholders about how to develop an equitable agreement that reflects the mutual understanding of both parties, rather than just kind of one side having a lawyer build something and it be very one-sided, and making sure that the end contract that is signed is one that both parties understand what the obligations, expectations are of each party in completing that contract. And that, I believe, that relationship building in the process of agreement developing leads to more secure tenure, because it's about the human connection and the communication and the understanding, that leads to a better relationship there. So access to lawyers or advisors to build these types of agreements, and empower and educate tenants on these type of contracts. The money to the TA providers to provide that work. Lawyers are expensive, and lawyers represent the person who hired them. They are often important, but as to review for protection, but sometimes a neutral mediator can be the best way to come to a mutual understanding in these contracts. So supporting those TA providers who are providing that service, obviously that's a little self-serving, but our team is small, and we are not able to reach everybody who needs that type of support, and templates off the internet don't provide it. Okay, I'm going to just move along because I had a list and I'm sorry. The land improvements section is missing a few things. I think that obviously like housing is one to discuss. I don't know if where in these subcommittees we're touching on housing, but obviously housing, farm worker housing, farm owner housing is a very important component of this. But what I think I'm seeing that's missing, and it could be slotted in a few places, is the deep interconnectedness of secure land tenure and conservation and climate resilience adaptation. So farmers and land stewards cannot invest in the health of the land and soil and environment without secure tenure. So that is a completely intertwined proposition. So okay, and then I'm seeing insurance kind of mentioned down here, lack of insurance options. I don't know, like I want to elevate that. I have farmers who cannot get insurance. They've got flooding one year and fire the next. There are no insurance companies, and even the state-run one is really hard to get. So this is a crisis. This is a crisis right now. People cannot get insurance. They're going without insurance. Okay, and then the last thing that I'll bring up, which is maybe a little request, since like this is apparently my candy store. We have run into the California Subdivisions Map Act recently, and there are a few exceptions for agriculture, but we're trying to understand how the Subdivision Map Act affects land leasing, especially some of these creative, what some are calling equity building leases. I'm very hesitant to call them that, but ground leases or development leases. I've gotten some advice from some lawyers like, wait, pause, even with the ag exemption, I'm not sure you can do that. I would love to get someone who's like got some real chops on the Subdivision Map Act to answer some detailed questions, because when it comes to especially public land tenure or land tenure with land trusts or other kind of conservation organizations, this is a really great model that's used in other states that we have yet to really play with in California. So there's organizations, Ag Commons Equity Trust, in other states that are doing these great structures, but I keep hitting roadblocks in California. So that would be neat.
Thank you, Leah. That's a lot that you just laid out and really is helpful in starting to think what are the sort of like tension point, where are the priorities? So really appreciate you laying that out. And yes, candy store.
Love the candy store. And yeah, so that wasn't prioritizing necessarily here. I think maybe we need to dive a little bit more into prioritization. But that might have just been adding more. I'm not prioritizing.
Want to give a chance, Emily, if and when you feel ready, please. I'll keep an eye to see if you unmute, or of course just jump right in. But I think everything you just added there, Leah, really I think helps in some ways to shift how these things are almost bucketed, right? So that there are pieces of these, like for instance, insurance, that are so foundational to some of the other issues of secure tenure on the land and the ability to steward, right? As you also brought up, and that's such an important thing to note, it's not represented quite in that way here. So I think you've given us actually quite a bit to think through, and how really what we're hoping this subcommittee can help us do. And what I'll explain right now is get into the work of redistributing these ideas, right? Like finding ways to, what are those foundational issues like you described, Leah? There are models, but what is it that is making those models not be easily applicable in the California context, right? Those sorts of things are exactly what we're hoping this subcommittee can start to explore and unpack and bring to the task force. So I just wanted to give pause for a minute in case anyone wanted, and then I'll say a little bit about like the working group model and how you might be able to just jump right in with what you were just talking about, Leah. But just pause for a second. Okay. Maybe Tessa, if you will go to the next slide, and then of course we can come back to this one again. And I think already from what has been shared, I actually think there are ways this could change. So we've already done the work of helping staff figure out what is most important for you as subcommittee members. But what we had done is draw, kind of create an outline of subjects that this subcommittee could consider further. That could be in the form of speaker engagements, right? It could be in the form of you writing the things you already know, right? That there would be some things you'd want to probably consider over the next few months, alongside the work of actually drafting ideas and suggestions that will then, of course, go to the full task force. So this subcommittee only has 2 members at this point. You might remember the discussion. I think both of you might have just recently been reminded about the working group model, right? Which would be 1 or 2 task force members can move forward work in the interim between the space of public meetings, as long as that work is then brought into the public meeting. So either in a subcommittee meeting or in a full task force meeting, right? So there are a few ways that you as subcommittee members could start to like write down those things you just shared, Leah, or start mentioning who you'd like to hear from, who might be able to describe exactly those insurance problems or whatever it is. And that staff are really here to assist you with that. So it could be a shared document. And I know, Emily, you would express that works particularly well for you. And so Leah also what works for you, so that you can start working through some of these topics and through some of these ideas with these deadlines in mind. So unfortunately, it looks like, I'm sorry, I'm not sure what happened, that the text is cut off there at the very bottom of the slide, but let me just say, what we're really aiming for is November 2024, this subcommittee would give an update to the task force on where things stand. So that could be that you already have had someone come in and speak with you about insurance, for example, and you want to sort of share that with the task force. Or it could be that you're still working on some of these questions and issues, really with the goal of doing this investigation and this drafting, so that in January 2024, you might have some initial ideas, recommendations, right? Narrative of the challenges that people are facing, that staff can then include in the preliminary draft of recommendations that will be shared with the task force in February of 2025. So as you both have heard in subcommittee meetings earlier this week, staff are planning to have a preliminary draft to share with the task force for discussion in the February task force meeting. And when we say preliminary, we really mean that. It might look more like an outline, right? Some things might be pretty well drafted to the point we've been talking about them, but other things might just be kind of sketches or placeholders. But that's really what we're working for right now, is so that this subcommittee could, by January, for inclusion in that February report, have some thoughts to contribute for the task force to consider. So I'm going to stop sort of talking here, and you'll see that we had kind of thought there's almost two buckets that could fit in the tenure question. One of them would be like the legal arrangements of tenure on the land. And then another thing then would be the maintenance of land and resource. So that's more, I think, in line with the stewardship, right? The longer you have to be on that land, to be in relationship with that land, the more that you can then tend to that land, right? And what is it that's required for that? So I just wanted to say those are kind of the two like bigger overarching things we had thought of, but I'm going to stop talking and open it up now and just see Leah and Emily, how you'd like to move this forward, or in what way you'd like to move from here.
I do like a shared doc.
Got it?
Shared docs are great. And we're allowed to do that as a subcommittee, or do we have to turn ourselves into a working group?
A working group is sort of like an administrative function of the subcommittee. So you are a working group of the subcommittee. It just turns out the subcommittee only has 2 members, but more members might join in the future. So what's really important is that working groups have a maximum of 2 members.
Okay.
Does that answer your question, Leah?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like the previous slide and talking about this organization and then how we're going to like generate some recommendations and prioritize, being able to actually make modifications and suggested edits to a document is definitely helpful.
Right.
So if we did like, what is the process to request a attorney that is, steeped in the Subdivision Map Act and an insurance, like not an insurance professional, it would be like is there an insurance law specialist, or I'm sure that's a thing. Like, so what's the next step to actually getting those people in front of us?
Telling us you want to hear from them, and then telling us whether you have people that come to mind. And sometimes you might, and sometimes you might not, but asking staff for assistance in getting you the knowledge you need is exactly what we're here for. Like, we are supposed to support you in that. So I would say telling us, so you just told us 2 people, 2 types of expertise, right? Professional work you'd like to hear from and engage with. And then what we can do is use the space of this subcommittee meeting to host that session. And of course, we would advertise to the full task force that that was happening in case other members wanted to listen in. They couldn't participate, of course, in that discussion per Bagley-Keene. But these subcommittees can really be spaces where we can start to share, to have speakers come in and speak with you, and you can learn from them and engage with them. So letting us know what you think would be important to hear about.
Can you go back to the last slide again, real quick?
Let me see if I can. I see this little.
Yeah, I'm seeing that too. Maybe not. Well, you don't have to. If I'm just. Does the insurance question belong with us? Are there other subcommittees that are focusing on that issue?
Something to put to you both, but there is no other subcommittee where the insurance issue has come up. And I think if it's at all helpful when staff were considering like the buckets, right, like where these things go, anything that was about the ability to maintain a secure relationship on land once you are on that land is what we were putting in the land tenure subcommittee.
Okay.
So
No, that's good framing.
So if you think insurance belongs there.
Yeah, I think just given the state of things in California right now, we'd be remiss to not try to think about insurance. I don't know how far we could get. Insurance is such a like large topic, and I don't know, like I don't know if California can even enact like regulations on the insurance industry alone, or if it has to be national. So lots of questions.
Important questions. That would be exactly what we could help you look through. I'm sorry, I'm trying to pull up that's the wrong slides for you both because it looks like so.
I just sent it to you, Camille, on chat. Yeah, sorry for the tech issues, guys.
No.
Sorry to break everything.
That was not you.
Yeah, I feel like California has a pre-existing condition and we should not be denied service for our pre-existing condition of climate change. How can we do something about that?
Yeah. Yeah, so I will just note that I'm, taking down some of the priority topics that have been specified, and then also what might look specifically like a research request or potentially like a speaker, like you were just noting about the insurance topic. So we can kind of summarize those towards the end of the meeting. And then it'll really be a matter of prioritizing which ones this subcommittee wants to focus on with the amount of time that you have.
Oh, I do
Thanks,
got it.
Thanks for pulling that up. Emily, do you want to jump in? Just want to make space in case you have anything to share.
Sure, I would recommend the I was trying to put it in the chat, but there's no chat option for the call. But the Indian Land Tenure Foundation, maybe we can get a speaker from there. They also, if you look at their website, have just like a very surface breakdown of like, what was it, the allotments and just different land topics or issues throughout the history of California. And I think it's actually their history tab that has that information. So,
Awesome.
but yeah, I would recommend getting a speaker or two. I'm not sure if it's like limited, but definitely one from that foundation.
Great, thank you for that addition.
Yeah, thank you. So I think we have actually quite a few sort of next steps that staff can take from this meeting and start moving forward for this subcommittee. One of those things will be basically putting this content into a document that the working group, right, Emily and Leah can consider. And And really, Leah, to your question earlier, and Emily, you just a great example of this. Like, if you do have particular things that you want staff to assist, right, share them with us, and we will do our best to. And it's also very helpful when you do that to let us know. Like, it's really critical we know this soon, because we can't actually even start to put some ideas down until we've heard blank, right? So that kind of putting those requests alongside kind of a timeline is also super helpful for staff, because it lets us just make sure that we're moving those requests forward in a way that the subcommittee needs. So we will, of course, be following up after this meeting with some additional information, notes, everything like that.
Yeah. So let's get in. Well, I guess maybe I'll just pause. Do either of you want to add anything else around priorities, deepening any topics you see on these slides, or additions?
I think that ownership is a type of land tenure, but I'm just wondering if we just kind of put some parentheses around ownership, and we are not directly diving into ownership in this subcommittee, because it is being like, we may be kind of some cursory work around it, but that it's not the focus of this particular subcommittee, because there's another subcommittee that is focusing on it.
When you say that, Leah, you mean the land acquisition?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then grants and resources, like, it's kind of, it feels a bit addressed. I think there's a couple of little ways it might come up in our discussions, but that it's, I just think it's being addressed in a pretty thorough way in all of the other subcommittees. So
Okay.
I don't want to repeat work. Not to erase it entirely, if that's been clear, because there are a couple of little ways that it will be relevant to the larger picture here.
Yeah, so let me ask you, is it helpful for staff to continue to come to this subcommittee if we're starting to see, right? And you, as you're watching other subcommittees, as you're participating in the full task force, if you start to see moments that the subcommittee really does want to take on a particular piece of that we bring that to you? Is that like so sort of looking to staff to help with you both have heard the puzzle metaphor in past subcommittee meetings, help with those puzzle pieces.
Yeah. And it seems like we're moving towards addressing the after ownership piece, as well as kind of the leasing and alternative to ownership models. So this infrastructure piece, the financial access and well-being, like, those are the ways that we're going to touch upon ownership, and what happens after ownership. And yeah.
Okay. So maybe I will move us forward in slides. Does that make sense, Tessa? And we can move toward closing out the meeting. And
Yeah, I think that's right. I'm just going to kind of try to reflect back the topics that I did here prioritize, since we are looking a bit different from the proposal outline that we had up on the slide. So what I heard was, for this subcommittee, the scope of priority topics might look something along these lines. So suggestions on improving contracts and leasing terms, specifically on public land, and looking at the mandates and the limitations that exist and making those more feasible for smaller scale growers. It's kind of one topic. Expanding support services for mutually beneficial agreement building. So support for farmers in establishing agreements or a lease. The next one is in the context of the ability to improve the land or infrastructure, like just flagging housing. And that, I will say, is kind of showing up in a bunch of different areas. So that'll be touched on. And then I heard something about land tenure models in other states, and I don't think I quite got that. Is there something more specific there to clarify?
That was in relation to the challenge of the Subdivision Map Act that
Okay.
there are different kinds of what some call equity building lease models, or also referred to as ground leases or development leases.
Okay.
And there are some great examples of folks doing that work in other states who do not have a subdivision map act. And the question is whether or not the act does in fact create a barrier for this in an agricultural context, or if agriculture is fully exempt, even getting into the weeds, even when large scale infrastructure such as building housing and barns is part of the act, and or the use of less than the entire parcel.
Okay. I trust that Caleb, who's taking thorough notes, got some of those details down.
But there are models from like agrarian commons and equity trust of how those have worked really well in other states, especially when with a public landholder.
Okay. Okay, so we have that as kind of a scope of topics that we might continue to massage, the subcommittee might continue to massage, and start developing ideas and recommendations around. And then we have a couple of specific topics that are probably immediately warranting a bit more research and potentially a speaker. So the Subdivision Map Act that was mentioned, the lack of insurance, and then a speaker from the Indian Land Tenure Foundation around different land relationships, I believe, or land ownership or tenure relationships, and looking at that history tab for some more guidance there. So putting that out there, I think maybe just pausing for a second, if anyone wants to flag like which of those issues, or so Leah and Emily, if any of those issues are rising as priority for you that you want to support or look into, let us know now. And otherwise we'll kind of organize this information and then come back to you with how to move forward.
I certainly think that we should hear from the Indian Land Tenure Foundation first, as we're still setting priorities. That feels really important.
Great.
Yeah,
Okay.
I agree.
The other two are more in the weeds.
Okay, yeah, that
Yes.
sounds good.
And do you imagine that it would be more manageable logistic wise to have speaker, like how there's 3 priorities, right, that we've identified, but should we have a speaker each session? Or are you going to throw all speakers into one meeting? How does that look? I might have missed that. Sorry, I'm doing like 5 things.
No, I don't think you missed it. I think that's a question that we'll have to think about and then come back to you with.
I think it might depend on both of you, right? And whether like shorter meetings 3 times makes more sense, or like a chunk of time where you move through these different presentations. So that will be an administrative question that we'll probably turn back to you. If you have an immediate response right now about what works best for you, love to hear it. And otherwise we can coordinate.
You talked about like the working groups, and that like you could just set up like an individual meeting for like I could create just a little working group for the Subdivision Map Act to get some questions answered. So if that like helps move things along faster, I doubt that anybody else is going to geek out with me on that. So we could kind of pull that aside if that helps us move along. I feel like the insurance issue, a lot of folks might want to attend that. But yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You can have a one-on-one interview if that's the best format to kind of.
I just need help finding the person who knows this in and out.
We can assist with that. And then all I'll say about that is, yes, you are welcome as task force members. You are always bringing in your knowledge and expertise to the work you do and collecting new, right, knowledge and expertise. You just want to make sure that you have a plan to then, of course, share that out with your subcommittee and your task force. So really, it's about bringing back into the public space what you learn. So I just wanted to say that, Leah, I'm sure you know that, but that would be an important addition.
And in that context, I think we can just note that most of the subcommittees are coordinating in order to be able to meet one more time before our November meeting, or the full task force November meeting. So just putting that in both of your ears, that we'll reach out to likely coordinate something before that November meeting so that the two of you can come back and as a subcommittee share out what you've learned over the course of the next month or 6 weeks.
I think we should move to public comment, right, Tessa, just in case there is anyone joining us.
Yeah, so you can go to the next slide. I believe the guidelines are on there.
Oh, of course.
There we go. Yeah. And are you seeing anybody online who submitted a public comment form?
I cannot look because I am now sharing screen.
Well, we can start, if anyone from the public on Zoom wishes to make a public comment, you can raise your hand now. And we'll ask you to unmute. All right. In that case, I think we can, move on. So you both have now seen this. I'm not going to walk through all of the dates, but we do have 4 or 3 subcommittee meetings coming up over the next couple of weeks. And then our full task force meeting in November in Salinas. 3 subcommittee meetings will be virtual, while the one in November in Salinas will be hybrid. And all the information for this meeting and all these other meetings can be found at this website. And yeah, thank you. So before we close out, we'll just give both Emily and Leah a moment to make any final comments.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for all your support in gathering our thoughts and organizing things so well. Appreciate you.
Thank you both. Thanks for being here. And that concludes our first subcommittee meeting of the Land Tenure Subcommittee.
Thank you very much. More soon.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Okay, moment. Let me stop sharing. Oh, it's